Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. I've sung the praises of Session Zero for as long as I've existed on this godforsaken, brain-rotting website. But for those who are unaware, a Session Zero is basically the prequel session to an actual campaign, where expectations are set and bad character ideas are roasted almost as badly as In Praise of Shadows after he slandered Wendigoon thinking he'd get Twitter to clap like seals, only for the internet to banish him back to his room to deep-throat the nearest bottle of Soylent while reconsidering his YouTube career. Yeah, I'm a bit of a Wendigoon fan, how could you tell? Anyway, back on topic. Even in groups that are already familiar with one another, a Session Zero is always a good idea, because it allows you guys to talk openly about your characters and the story the DM has planned without the veneer of metagaming getting in the way. After all, someone expecting to play in a story with a similar tone to The Hobbit might be in for a rude awakening when the DM's Berserk campaign has them rolling initiative against a freaky-looking horse. Session Zeros are pretty dope, but unfortunately, not everyone sees it that way. Yes, dear listener, despite me dropping the Lord's wisdom for years now, there are some people who think that Session Zeros are optional at best and a waste of time at worst. The audacity of some people to ignore me. Me! The story I have for you today stars a player who has a thing for making their disdain for Session Zeros annoyingly apparent, only for their dumb little world to crumble around them when the DM politely informs them that their character sucks the entire bag of dicks. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG-Horror-Stories. Enjoy. This week's story comes from Reddit user Ambi202 and is titled Problem Player Ditches Session Zero and Freaks Out When Told Their Character Didn't Work in the Setting. This is gonna be ranty because this player has been driving me insane for 3 years. I run a yearly summer campaign for about 8 of my friends every year, and in general, it's wonderful. But I have one player who just drives me completely up the wall. The long and short of it is that it's a lot of what you've already read on this sub. He's constantly late to sessions, he butts in and interrupts during the other PC's character moments, he simultaneously has no idea how the game works, yet constantly disputes my rulings, etc, etc. We had an issue last year wherein I found out in the final arc of our campaign that he hadn't been counting his spell slots and had been casting up to 30 spells per long rest as a warlock. He often does stuff like that accidentally, which gives him an extremely unfair advantage over my other players. Needless to say, I have never been a fan of his main character syndrome playstyle in which he insists on always being the coolest person at the table at the expense of the other players. But it was generally manageable. But after what happened last week, I'm trying to figure out how to ask him to leave the table without causing issues in the friend group. My table always does a Session Zero in which we make characters together, talk about the setting, and do a bit of interweaving of backstories. This year was particularly important because of our setting being very specific with low magic and limited races, and so just handing in a standard character might not fit in the world. Our problem player didn't seem to think so though, because he didn't show up. No warning, no text beforehand, just completely ditched, which is already annoying, because it kind of feels disrespectful to the time I put into planning, making a setting brief, and little games to play to help the players with character creation and stuff. When I texted him about it, he said he already knew how to make a character, which was demonstrably untrue, and that he didn't need to come. Ignoring the fact that he doesn't know the setting we're playing in, I also use Session Zero to make sure the players have a chance to say if there's anything they don't want to see in the campaign. So this player also felt that he didn't need to be there to make sure he was aware of the boundaries of his table mates. Cool. Against my better judgment, I sent him all the info he would need for character creation, including the lore of the setting. the rules for magic since it's a low magic campaign, etc, etc. I also specified that I wanted paper character sheets, no use of a generator like D&D Beyond, and that we used point buy. My reasoning for this was that most of my players don't play D&D at all, apart from my campaigns, so they don't fully understand the game. Since I have a large table, I can't help everyone at once, and I find that by making your character pen and paper with the books, players tend to understand how their PC functions better, which leads to a smoother, more fun game for everyone. That dude's behavior is so unkosher that the nearest rabbi probably just keeled over from a heart attack. I've seen this belief around D&D circles that a Session 0 is all about making sure the players are prepared and satisfied with the world that the DM has prepared for them. This is partly true. If your buddy Bruce starts shaking and crying whenever he sees a flying animal thanks to a childhood incident involving bats, you probably shouldn't force him to sit through Curse of Strahd if you want him to remain as your friend. But here's the thing. Session 0 is for the DM too. You see, the whole time the DM is helping you make your character abilities, or listening to you prattle on about how your character's great-great-grandcousin thrice removed did it with a dragon and that's why you need a multi-class into sorcerer, they are listening very closely. Your DM is doing some FBI shenanigans and trying to learn if anything about you or your character is a threat to national security. And by national security, I mean game balance, campaign story, or overall player enjoyment. Mr. President, there's been a second rogue player. But unlike the government, the DM actually needs to know everything there is to know about your character for both your and the game's benefit. If a DM doesn't know what spells you have or how they work, combat is going to be more boring and drawn out than a Ben Shapiro monologue. If they don't know anything about your backstory, then you're going to feel more neglected than the WNBA. And if they don't know what you like and dislike out of the TTRPG experience, then they might scuff their PHP's dust cover after beating you over the head with it when you inevitably start whining. So you can imagine that no call, no showing to a Session 0 because you don't need it carries the same energy as someone not showing up to the DMV because they feel that they don't need a license to drive. It is selfish, it is inconsiderate, and it's just plain stupid. Also, I feel you, OP, about banning D&D Beyond at your table. Yeah, sure thing, Hasbro. Let me just go ahead and struggle for 9 hours with the most dogshit UI I've ever seen so I can drop $60 on one digital book that you could take away from me at any time, even though I already own the physical copy, when I only need a single paragraph about feats to make a new character. It's not like we needed another excuse to bury our faces so deep into our phones that we could smell Mark Zuckerberg's ballsack. But Amazon, I mean Critical Role told me to buy it, so I guess the product must be flawless. Consume product. Man, I really am a cynical aren't I? Give me a second, everyone. I need to go touch grass. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, Session 0s are arguably the most important session that you show up to. Because even if you miss every other session, at least the DM and the other players will know what they're missing out on. Low-key, I wouldn't even be that mad because I think I'd be too in awe at the size of that man's balls. The Chad energy would be astounding. This player sends me his character sheet hours before our first session, and I'm wondering if he even read my text. He's given me a sheet that is clearly from D&D Beyond. It's notable that he also did this last year, as in he made a character on D&D Beyond from his phone at the table during Session 0, while I was helping everyone else do pen and paper character creation. He could have asked me to help, but he actively chose not to. It's not the technology that I have an issue with, it's the fact that he refuses to A, make his character so he understands how they function, and B, make his character collaboratively with the rest of the party. His character also had 4 18s for stats, and I'm not great with math, but I don't think point buy allows that. He picked out a race that I had asked not to be played this year for story reasons, and a class that I had asked him not to pick because 2 other players were already in that class. Any one of these things on their own would have been fine, but all them together just felt like he was actively ignoring everything I said. Lastly, he did not include his backstory, which was meant to have been sent to me several days prior. The D&D Beyond thing was an unwinnable battle, so I just pointed out the actual mechanical issues with his character, such as the high stats, the race, and the class, and the fact that he had far more weapons and armor than would be possible with just the starting equipment. He threw an immediate fit. He complained that I was dampening his creativity, that I was being too controlling of his character creation, and that D&D is a fantasy game, so he should be able to do whatever he wants. I'm a super story-driven DM, and I will bend my worlds and rules to accommodate players' ideas and creativity. But the character he gave me literally could not exist in the world we were playing in. I felt really bad about this at first, because I didn't want my setting to mean this player wasn't having fun. So I tried to offer the compromise that he could keep his stats and class if he just changed his race, which was the main issue story-wise. He absolutely refused and told me that the race is integral to his backstory. His backstory! I asked him to send it over so we could figure out a way to make something that would make everyone happy, and he told me that his backstory was a secret, and that he was not going to send it to me. I've been playing D&D for 7 years, and no one has ever said anything even remotely similar to this. It rang my alarm bells extra loud, because in the past this player has randomly said things like, "Oh, I used to be a part of this faction, they'll just let me into their hideout," or "The prince and I go all the way back, and we're childhood friends, so he wouldn't arrest me," when these things have never been mentioned in his backstory or otherwise. I'm all for improv, but with him it feels like he's just making things up to avoid encounters or bypass the narrative I've written. I wanted to be nice about the whole thing, so I just told him that that's not how my table works, but I'll make sure to keep his backstory extra super secret from the other players. He threw another hissy fit and said that I was being too controlling. To my great and incredible surprise after all of this, the player showed up late to our first session. Though the session was overall lovely, he spent the entire time moping and glaring at me, somehow both not participating and overshadowing all the other players. Truly incredible. At one point, another player asked him something about his character, and he responded with something along the lines of, "It was meant to be this, but the DM wouldn't let me because of her setting," which I found a bit rude. I'm not sure if this situation is grounds for an exodus from the table, but I'm seriously considering either that or asking the player if we can talk about how the ways he's acting is making me and his table mates feel, as I know that I am not the only one annoyed with all this. Obligatory shout out to my other 7 players who rock and have never done anything bad ever. End of story. Oh, well, it was going to be this, but the DM said, well, your mom was supposed to swallow, but look how that turned out. If there is one thing I absolutely cannot stand, it's entitlement. This guy feels entitled to everything that the DM can give, but isn't willing to give a single inch of ground on anything. Believe it or not, but that's not how relationships with other people work. Imagine being so fragile that you try to get an entire table to gang up on the DM just because they're doing their job. Honestly, the whole hiding his backstory thing would be enough for me to mash the delete button on both him and his character. But what really gets me here is this guy's interpretation of improv. See, a good 80% of D&D is just making shit up, but that doesn't mean that RPG improv is baked the same way as your traditional comedy improv. There's this prevailing concept in improv that you're not supposed to say no to stuff, but in D&D that is far from the case. The thing that separates RPG improv from other kinds is the fact that it's regulated by a strict set of guidelines, in the same way that life is regulated by a strict set of guidelines. You don't just get to walk into a retail store and say, "No, it's okay, the owner of this store would let me shove this Rolex in my pocket because we went to elementary school together." That's how you get yourself tased before being put in your county's adult timeout box for the evening. When you play an RPG, there's an understanding that it's gonna be a shared fantasy. But what makes it a shared fantasy is that there is an objective reality that follows established rules that everyone has agreed to in the session 0. Without that, it would just quickly devolve into grown adults debating about how they all have impenetrable force fields like they did when they were 9, and that's just embarrassing. But you know what's not embarrassing and is 100% guaranteed to get you an attractive girlfriend? Sending me fan art! That's right, how about we take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake? This week's fan art comes from viewers Iron and Medieval, who collaborated on this depiction of the Drake in human form. I always like seeing the fan arts with human drakes in them because it feels like y'all are playing Battleship trying to pin down what the dude behind the dragon looks like. I've gotten femboys, Ganondorf lookalikes, and now I got Neil Patrick Harris sitting here. Of course, this is assuming that there is a person behind the dragon. Truly, I am an enigma. Also, Larry's there too. They'll never suspect it, Larry. Me, the cartoon dragon on the internet who reads Reddit for a living. Once my plan reaches its climax, I'll be a god. Whoa, calm down there, your majesty. You're a grown man sitting in a closet filled with garbage. Silence, minion. Just because I'm the only one who can hear and see you doesn't mean I will tolerate your disrespect. So you're off your meds again, huh? Yes. Thank you again, Iron and Medieval, for submitting your art. If you'd like to see your fan art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to send it to the email in my About section. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and send in your fan art. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.